As Nigeria's GDP increases to 3.84% in the fourth quarter of 2024. President Bola Tinubu has continued to reiterate his commitment to fixing the economy, lifting Nigeria out of poverty. On the other hand, experts are forecasting that Nigeria's economy will grow by 3.5% year over year in 2025. This is as inflation rate declined from 24.48% to 23.18%, and food inflation also dropped to 23.51% year on year in February. In all these, the CBN has been firming up reforms and regulatory policies on the forex market and foreign resources control measures to shore up the naira. Economic watchers have also urged the government and major manufacturers to scale up production so as to increase food security. But how does all this translate to food on the table, money in the pocket, and most importantly, purchasing power of goods and services for Nigerians? Well, joining me tonight to dissect this is an economist, Kelvin Emmanuel. Good evening to you, Mr. Emmanuel. Welcome to Politics Tonight.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having me. It's always a privilege to be here.
Let's start by evaluating Nigeria's economy in the last 20 months. In your own assessment, what is the state of the economy? If according to the Minister of Finance and Coordinated Minister of Economy, Mr. Wale, the country narrowly avoided collapse as after relying on illegally borrowed central bank funds that far exceeded regulatory limits. By numbers and by indices available, are we doing well?
You know, it's an interesting question you asked. We can agree that where we are today is not where we were in 2023. There's been a measure of progress. We can also agree on the fact that about 30.6 trillion naira was raised illegally in violation of Sections 38 of the CBN Act of 2007 that says that the central bank cannot borrow the federal government of Nigeria more than the equivalent of 5% of its real GDP for the previous accounting year, you know, and that between 2019 and 2022, about 17.3 trillion was raised through quantitative easing, where the central bank basically created money that didn't exist and pumped into the system, and it didn't generate enough revenues to equate with that amount of injection, and you could see inflation skyrocketed, and then the central bank had to, you know, go back to see how it can, you know, reduce the amount of cash in circulation, raise CRRO that was 14% when the past CBN governor came in 2014, raised it to an all-time high now at about 50%. I think by the time he left office, it was about 32.5%, if I'm not mistaken, in 2023. But what we cannot agree on is the fact that the origin of the crisis that we had with inflation actually started from the government-owned enterprises not remitting FX that the central bank needed to make balance of payments, and that FX, the naira equivalent, translated to funding the budgets of the government, and money is being credited to the Consolidated Revenue Fund. And the CBN stepped in and illegally violated Section 38 of the PIA. So if we look at 2023 and look at the fact that the central bank was technically insolvent in 2023, even if this was not very prominent, you know, in the news in 2023, it was technically insolvent. They had over $10 billion in swaps with external asset managers. They had $7 billion in forwards, which has been drawn down significantly below $2 billion. Kudos to the work that the central bank team has done, even if I think they still have a lot of work to do. And even if I think that not releasing the annual financial statement of the central bank in violation of Sections 50, subsections 1 and 3 of the CBN Act of 2007 is an issue that the CBN has to grapple with. You know, in 2023, the government was spending practically 7 trillion naira in subsidy payments, under recovery for subsidy payments. Okay? Now, compare from 2023 compared to where we are today, has there been progress in terms of how the exchange rate system has been managed, the fact that the black market premium was over 30%, the difference between the official and parallel market rates, and the government was paying more than $300 million per month in FX subsidy that it didn't have. The fact that the government could practically not fund its budget. Debt servicing was 32%. But then the question today is, if you look at 2025 Appropriation Act, debt servicing is 34%. Because they are going to spend debt servicing and sinking fund is 16.3 trillion of 49 trillion in 2025 Appropriation Act. So have we really made progress? That's the question that I'm asking between 2023 and date. If debt servicing was 32% in 2023 and is now 34% in 2025 because the government cannot work on its capital formation enough to mobilize revenues to finance budgets and has to rely on borrowing. Have we really made progress? CRR is 50%. Interest rates is over 25%. And with due respect to you, I don't agree with the MBS numbers that says that inflation is down to 23.5%. And the reason I know that is because the CBN operates what they call inflation targeting, which means that inflation to interest yield curve has to be at 400 basis points or 4%. So if inflation is really at 23.5%, the Monetary Policy and Implementation Committee, Technical Committee of the CBN should be advising the MPC to cut down interest rate to 20% or 19.5% because it should stay between that 4% yield band. So the fact that the CBN is not willing to take action on the CPI rebasing that the MBS came up with shows you that in the CPI basket, food still takes about 60% of the income of Nigerians and energy takes up 20%, which means that if you add 60 to 80, food and energy takes up 80% of the basket. And if we're still having like headwinds to the numbers of food and inflation and energy prices, you can see that with the pause or the ending of the Naira-based crude oil swap, petrol prices are now anywhere between 960 and 980 in most regions of Nigeria. Inflation still persists. So, you know, I don't know if I should say we've made progress. Did we come out of a near bankruptcy? Was the option in 2023, to be fair to Mr. President, to have said, okay, we're going to declare bankruptcy, you know, and not meet up with our debt obligations, compared to him announcing that he's removing FX and petrol subsidy? Well, I supported that action in 2023. Was the mode of implementation the best? I would say it was not the best. So, you know, when you look at the numbers and compare it, have we really made progress in the last 20 months? The numbers are not very, very thrilling. They're not spectacular.
So still talking about numbers, Mr. Emmanuel, because economists also say the Nigerian domestic economy recorded significant growth in the fourth quarter of 2024, expanding by 3.84% to reach 22.61 trillion naira. I do not know to what extent you agree with these numbers. Interestingly, also, there's been a lot of efforts by this current administration to tackle the distortions in the foreign exchange market. How much impact have these efforts made in stabilizing the Naira? And evaluating these efforts by Mr. Yemi Cardoso, have these efforts yielded the desired results?
So, to the extent where we can say that the central bank has, worked very hard to sterilize its loans, drawn down on forwards for capital and dividend remittances from at $7 billion in forward, it paid down 4.6. Then there was 2.4 that was hanging for a period of time since last year, and then it just resumed drawing down on the remaining $2.4 billion, even if a lot of the companies on the receiving end had billions of naira in overdraft charges that they had to settle with their bankers. Okay, the fact that there was a migration from a managed float towards the Nigerian foreign exchange market system that was based on, a matching system that is being operated by Bloomberg that ensured more transparency, and that are seeing an influx of, FPI investments into Nigeria. We can say that there has been a significant uptick in the amount of FPI flows. Well, then the question you have to ask is, do you want an economy where hot money is coming in and staying for 12 to 24 months and is putting up forwards to hedge risk so it's able to take monies out when it wants to take monies out? and is looking at the exit door at the same time it enters, because it's more concerned about the exit than it is about the entry. It's easy to enter, it's not easy to exit, as we've seen in Nigeria over a period of time, because the issue of issues around the foreign exchange market, the lack of liquidity. The fact that we have a non-deliverable forwards market that is not liquid, where people basically cannot pay a premium to hedge the rates that they want to enter the markets at, and because of that, they have to resort to speculative means of buying FX and putting in their domiciliary account onshore. And you can see that there are about $29 billion onshore held in Nigeria. We can say that we've seen stability in the FX markets, okay? And this is also credit to the CBN for introducing harmonized reporting for net open positions for banks, especially tier 1 banks. They had about $5 billion offshore they were using for speculation on the foreign exchange market. The implementation of this B matching system has seen them exit all of those net open positions long, of 0% long that they had in onshore, that was helping them to speculate on the rate and move increase the volatility index significantly. So yes, there's been progress. Yes, you've seen an uptick, but when it comes to the net external reserves of the central bank, that is not encumbered. Okay, when you look at the net asset ratio of the external reserves of the central bank, it's not great. The net external reserves is supposed to be significantly above your balance of payments for 1 year. So for you to be comfortable, you need to have net external reserves that is over $10 billion. I'll tell you that based on the numbers I've seen, based on the realities I understand of the position we're in, we don't have net external reserves that is up to $7 billion. Okay. Maybe it explains why the government is looking at going the route of another wholesale agreement to raise FX to meet up with its pending dollar obligations it has in its payment schedule.
But really, would you say the Naira fortune, I mean, I've heard you, I heard everything you said, but would you say the Naira fortune would have worsened without these aggressive forex interventions, especially in the month of March? Second, would you expect the CBN to continue supporting market liquidity? Is it correct to assume that this will help maintain the Naira stability at current levels in the short term?
So my fear about the FX markets and stability of the market, and what I think can threaten the stability, comes back to the issue on Dangote refinery and the fact that, as we speak, is importing around 10 million barrels of crude oil to Nigeria, and the fact that NUPRC has not been able to enforce sections 1094C of the PIA to ensure that the quota of what the refiners need to refine is guaranteed by the domestic market on a willing buyer, willing seller basis. And whenever the refiner has a situation where his balance of payment from net export proceeds for, the dollars he gets from exporting products out of Nigeria, jets, diesel, premium motor spirit, polymers, is not enough for him to sterilize external dollar obligations, and he will have to raid the FX markets in Nigeria in terms of, buy up FX to be able to import or support his, financial instruments that he uses to import products into Nigeria. And that will mean that the Naira will depreciate. So now this calls back to the question. So you have a set of people who say, but if you give the Naira-based crude oil swap, how do you get FX to be able to do your balance of payment obligation? The other side to that conversation is that you get more value when you export derivatives from refining crude oil than you get when you export crude. Okay, so you have net export proceeds in dollars that the refiner brings back into Nigeria that will be higher than what you get if you were exporting crude, number one. Number two, when you have a refiner that is able to satisfy the domestic needs, the energy needs of Nigeria in terms of white transportation fuels, what you have is you prevent other importers or marketers from raiding the same FX market to get the dollar liquidity they need to bring in products into Nigeria. So my fear about the stability of the FX rate in Nigeria, which we've seen over the last 2 months, is that if this issue about supplying Dangote with crude is not addressed, and addressed in time, like you've seen, prices of petrol has gone up, and that takes about 20% of the CPI basket. You might likely see the naira will begin to drop again, and that's the greatest threat I see to the stability of the FX markets.
All right. I mean, talking about the naira for the impact of the naira for crude policy, we'll come to that in a moment because I think I have about 10 minutes for that conversation. Before that, you know, some analysts have talked to me about the need for import substitution to reduce pressure on foreign exchange. I mean, last week a report by the Minister of Steel Development, Shuaibu Abubakar, surprised a lot of Nigerians. According to that report, Nigeria imports about $4 billion worth of steel annually. My question is, why should we still be importing steel when we have the potentials with various rolling mills spread across the country? Jakarta Steel Company is there, Delta Steel Company, and various other rolling mills. Why should it still be important? And do you believe that report?
I believe the report that Nigeria imports $4 billion of steel. But before we talk about it, I want to tell you that Nigerians have an unhealthy obsession with legacy assets, and we've seen it with government-owned refineries. I mean, you know, the installed capacity of the two refineries that NNPC claims is operational, 185,000 barrels. If you multiply that by 73 liters, which is what you get per barrel of crude, when you sweat a barrel of crude, you're supposed to achieve 13.1 million liters of PMS. If, for example, they were doing that, why are they importing PMS? Now, what I'm trying to say is that our attachment to legacy assets like the Ajaokuta steel mill. For example, Ajaokuta, that steel mill was not supposed to be sited in Ajaokuta historically, going back decades. I know this is a very touchy subject. It's tribal, it's religious, and whenever this topic comes up, because when you come out and you say that, oh, the Ajaokuta steel mill was not supposed to be located in Ajaokuta inland, yeah? Ajaokuta is not close to a seaport. Now, when you look at the Royal Haskoning report of 2002, you see that in the maritime design of Nigeria, okay, you have 10 river ports from the equatorial, like the Gulf of Guinea, coming into inland. 10 river ports. Ajaokuta was supposed to have one of those river ports. Okay, so now the question is, number one, do you have capital and maintenance draining budgets at Nigerian Inland Waterway Services to open the channel for you to bring in high-grade iron ore? Because NIOMCO, Nigeria does not have high-grade iron ore, more than 50% concentration, that you can use to beneficiate steel. So if, for example, you don't have the budget to be able to dredge for maintenance and capital dredging to open the channel for you to bring iron ore that will be docked at a port or a state that is a littoral state that borders on the Atlantic Ocean, why are we so obsessively attached to Ajaokuta? Number one. Number two, is there a case for the government does not know how to do business and it's best for it to sell off Ajaokuta and hand over the business of, you know, beneficiating steel to the private sector? Number three, can we accept that Nigeria does not have high-grade iron ore with concentration above 50% and resort to importing high-grade iron ore from Sierra Leone, from Guinea, or from Liberia that has high-grade iron ore? Number three. Number four, can we accept that it's best to site a steel rolling mill close to a seaport so that you don't have to grapple with the challenge of not having a channel open for your river ports because NIWA does not have a budget for capital and maintenance dredging, and you can't bring in iron ore that you dock at a seaport close to the Atlantic Ocean? These are the issues that the Minister of Steel needs to address. Unfortunately, we have an obsession as Nigerians to legacy assets that are government owned, and we fail to realize that over the last over 60 years, Nigeria government has proven time and again that it doesn't have the capacity to do business, and it's best for you to leave business to the private sector.
That sounds very interesting, Mr. Kelvin. I'm sure you know that's open for debate. But at the same time, you know, the federal government has reaffirmed its commitment to strengthening Nigeria's policy architecture to ensure more effective governance, with a focus on coordination, talking about accountability and impact. And agreeably also, the federal government is talking about institutionalizing structured and efficient policy making. What is the nexus, I mean, between this commitment and the Nigerian economy?
Can you come again, please? Can you come again? I didn't get that question very well.
Did you get my question? Oh, okay, so I said at the same time, the federal government has now reaffirmed its commitment to strengthening Nigeria's policy architecture to ensure more effective governance with a focus on coordination and impact. Also mentioned accountability. The federal government is now talking about institutionalizing structured and efficient policy making. So I'm asking, what's the nexus between this commitment and the Nigerian economy?
So, first of all, I think that I have not seen a lot of interministerial coordination in terms of policy making. And I'll use the example of steel that we've just talked about. For steel to work, you need the Ministry of Petroleum and Gas, because you can see that AKK, for example, a lot of the steel that is used for AKK is imported into Nigeria. AKK has been at 75 to 80% completion for quite a while. The River Niger crossing for OB3, that is supposed to be a main feed for taking gas to the irrigation point at Jaokuta, is still in limbo. 1.8 kilometers, they've not been able to cross it. You need petroleum and gas to work with steel. You need petroleum and gas to work with transport and maritime and blue economy. You need interministerial coordination. So I find that there isn't a lot of interministerial coordination in Nigeria, and that is a problem. You also need the Ministry of, you also need the Ministry of Power. I haven't seen the special advisor to the president on policy coordination. I haven't seen a lot of, for example, the Ministry of Power also has a nexus with steel, because you have a problem of delivering gas from manifolds to gas-based industries, GENCOs, which is one major problem that the Nigerian electricity supply industry, NESI, has. So in terms of policy architecture and coordination, I haven't seen a lot of interministerial coordination. You know, them coming together and looking at this stuff and saying, this is where all of us meet, and this is how we need to amend the law, if we need to amend the law, and then form policy, and then work together on an interministerial basis, because there are legacy problems that cannot be solved by just one. You need that pact and that coordination, okay? On the second issue about accountability, it goes back to the fact that when I look at the 2025 Appropriation Act, I mean, you have 14 trillion naira for personnel, you have about 18 trillion naira for overhead, right? I think we have a major problem with procurement in Nigeria, okay? There's a lot of procurement fraud. I'm not alleging or making specific allegation at anyone. There's just a lot of procurement fraud that can only be tackled if the government looks at the law that establishes the Bureau of Public Procurement, and if it focuses on digitization and automation of the procurement process in Nigeria. Okay? I think when you look at it head to head, in terms of the amount of ghost workers, of personnel, people who are not supposed to be on the payroll, to the amount of overinflation of projects. Okay. Procurement fraud takes a bigger chunk of the cake to ghost workers or personnel fraud in the system. I just find it like worrying that, you know, many years, about 14, 15 years after Stephen Orasanye came out with the report, the government has not done anything about it to, you know, integrate the MDAs and reduce the cost of governance, which is a major problem. So
Mr. Emmanuel, is it that the government has not done anything or has not done enough?
Mr. President, with due respect to him, has only increased the size of the number of ministries we have. It's increased the size of government. He's not reduced it. So he's not done anything about implementing the Stephen Orasanye report since it came out, despite him promising that he was going to do something about it. The evidence points to the contrary. All
right. You know, with hours to go before the deadline elapses, when we come back from this break, we'll talk about the first quarter of 2025. And helping us do justice to that conversation is Kelvin Emmanuel, an economist. Thank you so much for staying with us on the program, Mr. Emmanuel. Now, I want us to talk about the Naira for crude policy. I mean, Nigerians have started to buy petrol for as high as 930 Naira per litre. In some places, 970 Naira per litre. Conversation is on about whether or not there needs to be, or there would be, a renegotiation of the agreement. But you've alleged in the tweet that there is a cartel of marketers whose racket of importation is threatened by Dangote lowering its prices in order to get back at him. Their lowest hanging fruit was to convince the SOE to end the Naira-based crude swap, to force the hand of the refinery to swap sales to Nigerian off-takers in USD. What exactly were you talking about?
So, you know, it's interesting. The first thing I have to say is that NMDPRA does not have a lab to test for products, and them not having a lab to test for products, and them also not, you know, having a framework to that forms like an empirical basis on which they measure the actual daily consumption of PMS in Nigeria, puts sections 317, 7 to 11 in question. Because if you can't test for sulfur limits and if you can't measure how much Nigerians actually consume, then it puts that section into question. And that section simply says that if the refiner, this is a law the Nigerian government wrote, by the way, if the refiner is able to prove that he can supply the domestic market with what it needs, Dangote is currently at 44 million liters per day with about 600,000 barrels refining capacity utilization. The regulator is supposed to withdraw the import licenses of the marketers who are bringing products into Nigeria. And in the last few weeks, we've been here to witness the fact that as Dangote lowered its prices, people started complaining about predatory prices. Some marketers allege that, oh, they are losing money because their landing cost is higher than the price at which is offering the market ex-gate plus refiner's premium. Okay? So it makes sense to assume, okay, that, listen, if he's lowering his prices, he has become a threat, and the only way to curtail it is to end the Naira for Crude program that gave him the laxity to, based on him achieving positive cracking margin, lower the prices of petrol to the market. So,
Mr. Emmanuel, before you go on, do you agree with those who say that was predatory pricing?
I don't agree with them. And the reason I don't agree with them is because, you know, Dangote operates like the largest single-train commercial-sized refinery in Nigeria. He's offering products to the market because he has achieved what they call economies of scale and a positive cracking margin to be able to offer petrol at prices to the market that is fair to Nigerians. It's not predatory pricing. Nigerians are complaining about the high cost of PMS, which is a critical input for their daily lives. So if he's reducing the prices and they are not able to compete with him, then there's a problem, considering that the quality of the products they bring into Nigeria is questionable in that it doesn't meet up with the sulfur limits that is set by the regulator. And let me tell you why this is very important. The sulfur limits of petrol has a consequence on the price. Ultra low sulfur diesel unleaded 10 ppm is not the same with ultra low unleaded 50 ppm or 100 ppm or 200 ppm. The same thing for petrol. Okay? Unleaded 10 ppm is not the same for 50, for 100, or for 200, or for 500. Okay? So if you're bringing in products that has a high sulfur level and has a lower price as a consequence, why are you complaining that you can't compete with someone who has a higher quality and is offering a lower price to the market? It's a conundrum, and it's something that we should ask. Why is their landing price not able to compete with Dangote? Considering that the sulfur level they have, if you organize a third-party rubbing round table to test for the quality of those sulfur content in the petrol they bring into Nigeria, alongside with Dangote, it will not equate. Why are they not able to compete?
All right, so we do not digress. Talk to us about the impact. I mean, what has been the impact of the Naira for Crude policy?
Well, the impact of the Naira for Crude is that, look, when they set up the technical committee headed by Zach as the chairman of the technical subcommittee, they agreed that they were going to supply 385,000 barrels of crude per day out of the crude intervention stock of 445,000 barrels per day under the domestic crude supply obligation sections 1094C of the PIA. That was the agreement. The reality is that, according to NNPC, they said between January last year and today, they've supplied 84 million barrels. The first 36 or 38 million, if I'm not mistaken, were supplied in dollars. I'll say that out of the remaining 48, only about 16 or 17 million was actually supplied in Naira, at anywhere around maybe 110,000 barrels or 120,000 barrels per day, as compared to 385,000 barrels that was promised to Dangote. Okay? So the impact of that is when you refine 120,000 barrels per day, you get anywhere around maybe 8.9 to 9 million liters of PMS, which is an average of what he was giving to the Nigerian market as a share of the Nigerian market that he controlled. Knowing fully well that the actual daily consumption of PMS in Nigeria is not more than 35 million liters of PMS as compared to the 50 million liters of PMS that NMDPRA says that Nigeria consumes. Because it uses projection. It doesn't have a framework for measuring actual daily consumption of PMS in Nigeria. So that gave him the advantage of being able to price his products in Naira and reduce the price even if the margins are tight, because the refining business is a high turnover, low margin business. It's not a business where you make high margins as profits.
All right then. So if this agreement is not renewed, are the Nigerian consumers the biggest losers in this Naira for crude collapse? If it is not renewed, what is the implication of this for Nigeria and Nigerians?
Well, you know, I say that the people who are importing products, when they go to refineries and plants in Central Europe, in Western Europe, Rotterdam, Antwerp, in Malta, and in Eastern Europe, they buy products in dollars, okay, from those parts of the world. So if Dangote is a refinery, is not a depot, why can't they buy products from him in dollars? The implication is that if the government doesn't bring back the Naira-based crude swap on the table, petrol prices will stay above 1,000 Naira per litre, because what happens typically is that when you price petrol at Platts plus premium, and you add all the finance costs for whoever is taking the BGL letters of credit, you add all the vessel, bulk storage, terminal, cost throughput $2 per metric ton, NIMASA fee that forms your FOB, or your NMDPRA levy, and all your transportation costs from gantry, petrol prices will effectively be comfortably above 1,000 Naira per litre, and it will bite Nigerians, knowing fully well that we have a cost of living crisis on our hands, and inflation is above 30%. So if the government doesn't bring it back, and if the government opts for the wholesale agreement, like I hear reliably that they plan to raise another $7.5 billion to, you know, partly meet up with payment schedule for dues to IMF. IMF $400 million the government has to pay IMF, that is due $1.2 billion in Euro bonds, and less than $2 billion that is remaining for FX forward payments, then we're basically going to have inflation continue up. And if inflation goes up, the interest rates will remain up, exchange rates will be weak, and we will operate the same cycle.
All right. I mean, so while we wait for government's decision on that, I want you to talk to us about the need for policies that recognize the unique nature of the oil and gas sector to ensure sustained national competitiveness.
Policy that, sorry, can you come again?
So I said, while we wait for government's decision on that, I want you to talk to us about the need for policies that recognize the unique nature of the oil and gas sector to ensure sustained national competitiveness.
Well, it's a tricky question, but if you look at the PIA, for one, I think the wholesale agreements has been a disaster. Financialization of oil and gas assets has been a disaster for Nigeria. If the new FSA goes, we're going to have $21.5 billion so far that has been structured, with more than 300 million barrels of crude that has been pledged. It's a huge disaster. Number two, listen, there's a section in the PIA that actually prevents companies from playing in the upstream, midstream, and downstream at the same time. NNPC is doing that. They're operating a vertical monopoly. Even if the PIA provides a backdoor for them to set up an integrated energy structure to be able to circumvent that section of the PIA. But look, we need a structure where NNPC can focus on upstream exploration and production. Okay, sell off the assets that are moribund, that are instead taking monies away. Provide crude oil to domestic refiner. The government brings the players to the table, you know, transits the importers back to set up a consortium, give them license, build, compete, make Nigeria like a net exporter of refined petroleum products. Okay? And then when you go upstream, how do we accelerate the increase in the production of crude oil and gas? Number one, we have an external threat, which is the very volatile and fragile security situation in Rivers State. I don't want to go into the politics of it, but the government, the president and the NSA, they need to manage Rivers State very carefully, because Rivers State has anywhere around 360 to 400,000 barrels of crude in its contribution to the 1.47 million that we currently have. Okay? Now, how do you bring in operators to invest more money to accelerate production? How do you ensure that the shut-in wells that you have in Nigeria, the ones that are temporarily shut-in and are not permanently capped and sealed, they go back? You need to address the issues around remediation and legal liabilities around decommissioning and abandonment, especially remediation. So that, for example, Renaissance that has bought over 583 wells from Shell can go back and start operating those assets and increase the amount of crude oil. On deep water, we need to look at our petroleum fiscal regime and look at the commercial terms and ensure that we address the issue of the ultimate owner status of gas, because gas is a major problem. You know, the shortage of gas, for example, to NLNG, is the reason why a Telavarez will win a judgment at the London Court of Arbitration for 19 cargoes that it pre-sold to Vitol and Glencore in 2020 that was not delivered, that is going to set the shareholders in NLNG back by $380 million if they don't have risk insurance to cover for it. Okay, so we need to grow the pie and increase the amount of crude oil production, and not just focus on associated gas, but go to, look at the terms, commercial terms for non-associated gas, so that you can increase the amount of gas feedstock, not just for the domestic market, but also for the export markets. Okay, it's possible to actually satisfy the domestic crude supply obligations and stabilize the midstream sector, right? And ensure that we become net exporters of refined petroleum products. It's possible to increase revenues that the government gets in its capital formation to ensure that we can draw down on our debts and increase the amount of debt servicing and the obligations to the sinking fund.
Well, Mr. Emmanuel, I do apologize. Smuggling is another challenge. And I remember oil and gas experts saying a deregulated petroleum product market will ensure that the price gap is closed and smuggling becomes unattractive. But we're still dealing with this issue.
Look, I'll tell you what. If you look at the fact that they say, oh, there are millions of liters of PMS is smuggled across the borders in Nigeria, and you divide, for example, 20 million liters by, say, 30,000. You need over 330 trucks to be able to smuggle. I don't believe that line or that narrative that the problem we have with stabilizing supply to the markets in Nigeria is smuggling. I don't believe it.
Okay.
The same way, I have a challenge believing the fact that NIMASA has C4I, Nigerian Navy has Falcon I. They have the SCADA to effectively monitor and secure the maritime formation in Nigeria to prevent people who steal crude oil from Nigeria. The question is, why is that not happening?
All right.
Why is that not happening? Because the radar they have, the SCADA they have, sees. Why is it not happening? Why does the government have to give pipeline security contracts to non-state actors to guide pipeline infrastructure in Nigeria?
So because of our time...
Why is that?
Mr. Emmanuel, because of our time, let's talk about food security. Would you say there's been some level of progress from where we were last year? I mean, mid last year to be precise. About a year ago, the president directed states to increase local food production. I remember tasking them on supporting local farmers. Sadly, you hear stakeholders say Nigeria has food, but there is no food security. Have we made some progress towards achieving food security?
So I tell you that the decision that the president made last year to allow for grains to be imported into Nigeria for a window was the right decision. However, the implementation was delayed, from the time that the president gave instruction for his team to develop a framework for it to the time that the custom actually created a gazette for the implementation of it. There was a lag of about 4 to 5 months. That is a problem. And that the blame will rest on the shoulders of the coordinating minister of the economy, CME, Mr. Wale Edu. I think that it was the right decision. It's reduced the scarcity of primary production of inputs that manufacturers need in the B2B, B2C value chain. But I think that we're not addressing the foundational fundamental issues, which are, what are the real drivers of production? the smallholder farming needs capital, it needs financing. Okay, the invoice discounting model was a good model, but that was not scaled, number one. Number two, you have a problem of farm access roads. You have a problem of the fact that smallholder farmers don't have access to mechanized equipment, which is something that the federal government needs to step in to actually implement and not talk about. You have a problem of the cost of seeds that are imported, that are priced in USD. You have a problem of the cost of fertilizer. And if you look at it very well, NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Nigeria only has nitrogen, which is ammonium nitrate gas that is used to majorly produce urea. Yeah, you need phosphorus and potassium. Phosphorus comes mostly from Morocco, OCP Morocco. Potassium was coming from Eastern Europe, but because of Russia, Ukraine, and the Black Sea, and the lack of the ability of commercial vessels to navigate around the Black Sea, you had a stoppage of that import, and it is cost skyrocketed per metric ton. So we need to look at a framework for addressing the foundational knotty issues that will unlock and reduce the costs of the input that goes into food production. That is the major work of the government, thinking strategically on the long term for food security.
Perhaps
but
I should
most importantly, the government needs to, most importantly, it was a good decision that when the president came in 2023, he included food security in the national security basket. Okay, and I can say that the NSA has made progress in terms of reducing the incidence of raiding of farm settlements and farms across northeast and northwest Nigeria. He has made progress, but the president, the NSA has to sustain that effort to the tune that any attack on Nigeria's food security is an attack on Nigeria's national security.
All right, then. Perhaps I should have asked you this question earlier. And still talking about frameworks, AFDB today unveiled a country strategy paper for Nigeria's agriculture, infrastructure growth. Dr. Adesina, in that report, outlined the bank's innovative approach, trade credit guarantees, blended finance mechanisms, and forced loss coverage to close the finance gap for farmers. And I'm wondering what impact this will have on local farmers, or activities of local farmers in Nigeria. But sadly, we're out of time, but I must thank you so much. Economist and friend of the house, Kelvin Emmanuel, thank you so much for joining us this Monday. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.